when it came time to create the 12th game within the Final Fantasy series, instead of a new world, Square Enix decided to expand upon the world of Ivalice. However, Final Fantasy XII still maintained a unique identity to its world, as many of the assets and environments were never before seen in the Final Fantasy series. These assets and ideas were so notable that many of them saw their way into Final Fantasy XIV. And so today, we'll be looking at almost all the references to Final Fantasy XII in Final Fantasy XIV. As always, there will be story spoilers for both Final Fantasy XII and Final Fantasy XIV. Also, I will note that although tactics in 12 are incredibly interconnected as both are from the world of Ivalice, there will be minimal mentions to tactics in this video because I will be doing a separate video for tactics and its sequels, so be on the lookout for that video. Final Fantasy XII was first released in the fall of 2006 for the PlayStation 2. This story takes place in the world of Ivalice. The inhabitants of Ivalice encompass many different races, including the Banga, Sikh, Numo, and the Viera. Most notable of these is the Viera, which made their first Final Fantasy XIV appearance in Stormblood, when Fran made her appearance in the Ivalice Raids. The Viera then became a playable race on the launch of Shadowbringers. The wind-up Fran also came with the Shadowbringers Collector's Edition. Many of the characters in Final Fantasy XII also see their influence in Final Fantasy XIV through many of its glamours. Vaughn and Balthier's outfits appear as sets in the Ivalice Raids, although Vaughn's outfit actually comes from Tactics A2. Bosch, Pinello, and Larsa's outfits can be found in Zadnor. More info about these instances later on in the video. Like with Final Fantasy XI, there are many models in Final Fantasy XIV that came from Final Fantasy XII. Here are the comparisons between the two games. There is also the Nath Beastmen tribe, in which they seem to be modeled by the Urutan Yensa. There are many war models from Final Fantasy XII that served as a basis for the bosses in Final Fantasy XIV. The Ringworm appears as a boss in Stone Vigil as the boss Chudo Yudo. In Stone Vigil hard mode, the model for Fafnir appears as the boss Gorinich. And in Dog Meg, Grial is very similar to the Elder Worm found in Final Fantasy XII. The Terminus Bellwether boss in the Dungeon Amarant is the model of the Lesser Chimera. The first boss of Halatali is known as the Firemane, which is the name of one of the first bosses in Final Fantasy XII. However, this is only a reference in name. And Giruvegan, a boss in Stone Vigil hard mode, is also a reference to the Hunt in Final Fantasy XII, also a reference in name. Introduced in Final Fantasy XII, the Hunt board was a way for the players to explore the world to find unique monsters. Final Fantasy XIV also has boards in each expansion. The bills are even designed similar to the bills from Final Fantasy XII. The hunts in Final Fantasy XIV further reference the hunts in Final Fantasy XII with the icon above the hunts. This icon is the Rogue Tomato, the first hunt from Final Fantasy XII. In Heavensward, the hunts reward something known as Centurio Seals, which is a reference to Clan Centurio, a hunting clan that offers elite marks. The suffix of Egi comes from Final Fantasy XII, in which the overworld mob Garuda Egi appears, signifying the relation to the Garuda boss in Final Fantasy XII. In staying with the Aegis, Belius Aegis also appears in the Summoner questline in Final Fantasy XIV, the name Belius being the summon of fire in the Ivalice world. During the Shadowbringer storyline, Minfilia asks of Viera how old she actually is. Something similar happens in Final Fantasy XII when Vaughn rudely asks how old Fran is. In the Grand Cosmos, the boss Seeker of Solitude uses a model that is directly taken from the Mind Flayer in Final Fantasy XII. The relation between the two is further strengthened as the Seeker of Solitude was Beglug's disguise, a pneumo living on the First. In the text for the Pisco Demon hunt, which uses the same model as the Mind Flayer hunt, it states that this hunt used to be a pneumo before falling to the dark and sorcerous ways. And finally, it is possible that the Garlean armor that is seen in the story is based off or took inspiration from the Judge's armor from Final Fantasy XII. And now onto the Ivalice Raids. These raids served as a tribute to the Ivalice Alliance games. The story of the Ivalice Raids features a number of characters, which includes the aforementioned Fran, who leads the Lente Tears resistance and serves under Ashe and Rassler. In Final Fantasy XII, Ashe and Rassler were wedded at the beginning of the game, only for Rassler to die in battle. However, in Final Fantasy XIV, Ashe and Rassler are both siblings and are royalty to Dalmasca. Bagamnan also appears as the initial antagonist to the Ivalice Raids. And finally, Gabranth also appears in Final Fantasy XIV and serves under the Empire. According to Gabranth's profile, Bosch also existed in this world, but as his father rather than his twin brother in Final Fantasy XII. We start in the first raid, the royal city of Rabanstre. This city is based off the city of the same name. Our first two boss fights are with Mateus and Hashmal, two of the Espers from Final Fantasy XII. One recurring aspect of the Esper fights in Final Fantasy XIV is that many of them retain their powerful elemental jaw spells, renamed with the numbering system instead in the English version of Final Fantasy XIV. For example, we see Mateus and Hashmal use Blizzard 4 and Quake 4, respectively, with their concurrence effects behind them much like in the fights in Final Fantasy XII. After the fight with Hashmal, we are led into the Garamscythe Waterway, which is another area that first appeared in Final Fantasy XII under the city of Rabanstre. In the next raid, we go into Ritorana Lighthouse, which is based off of Pharos at Ritorana. The lighthouse in Final Fantasy XIV have very similar layouts to the lighthouse in Final Fantasy XII, from the extravagant giant door, to the teleporters, to even the green bridges that spawn in after defeating certain enemies. The first two bosses are also Espers from Final Fantasy XII, this time Famfret and Belius. Belius is significant in that the animation of Hellfire is directly taken from Final Fantasy XII. And we get to the final boss of Ritorana Lighthouse, known as Yasmat. Yasmat in Final Fantasy XII was a super boss and the last hunt available from Clan Centurio. This boss was notorious for having the most amount of HP in any Final Fantasy game at the time of Final Fantasy XII's release. Some of the music in the Ritorana Lighthouse also comes from Final Fantasy XII, specifically using the Zodiac Age soundtrack. At the start of the raid is Ascent. The boss music for both Famfret and Belius is Boss Battle. When going into the lighthouse, the music is the Mystery of Giruvegan. And finally, the battle with Yasmat uses Flash of Steel. And in the last raid, although the majority of this raid is a reference to tactics, the last boss, Ultima the High Seraph, uses a design that seems to be inspired by the version of the Esper in Final Fantasy XII, but without the machinery underneath the Esper. This boss uses attacks that Ultima used in Final Fantasy XII, like Holy 4 and Redemption. Now to the Save the Queen content. This content heavily referenced Final Fantasy XII through its areas, bosses, music, and gear offered in the Save the Queen storyline. The first set of notable gear is the Law's Order gear, which resembles Judge Zargabath, Judge Drace, and Judge Geese's armor. Pinello, Bosch, and Larsa's gear also appear through the Zadnor content. The music used in the Bajja Southern Front and Zadnor also comes from Final Fantasy XII The Zodiac Age. The skirmish music is Discord Imperial. Area music within Castrum Lacus La Torre and Dalriada is Into the Fortress. The boss music is Battle with an Esper. And the final boss's music is Life and Death. In Delubrum Reginae, the area music is the Sochin Cave Palace. And the boss music is Giving Chase. Within this content, there are also many references to Final Fantasy XII in a lot of the gameplay. One of the buffs that can be used is known as Bubble, which increases max HP. This buff was first seen in the Final Fantasy series with Final Fantasy XII, where this buff doubles the max HP. In Bajja, one of the fates is known as Fires of War, which is named after one of Balthier's quickenings. In Delubrum Reginae, one of the attacks from the final boss is Nordwain's Glow, which is named after one of Ash's quickenings. We also see more Espers in this content, the models coming directly from Final Fantasy XII. In Castrum, we find Andremelech. In Zadnor, there are 3 Espers within the area, Belius and Famfrit, which we've seen before, and another Esper, Shemhazai. And in Dalriada, we find Cuchulainn. A note that the name Cuchulainn also can be seen before with the Zodiark raid, but it's only a reference in name. And finally, there are 3 mounts that can be obtained within this content. The first 2 are the Gabriel mounts. While the model of these 2 mounts are actually references to Final Fantasy Type 0, the music played while riding them is Discord Imperial from Final Fantasy XII. And the other mount is the Al-Iglil, a mount that was originally seen in Final Fantasy XII with Balthier and Fran riding the mount. The tooltip for the mount is a quote from Balthier.
I'm only here to see how the story unfolds. Any self-respecting leading man would do the same.
In Final Fantasy XII, the summons known as Espers were powerful beings created by the Ikuria. At least 24 of these were created for each Zodiac sign, having a dark and light representative. Only Scions of Dark were obtainable through gameplay, with the exception of Zodiark and Ultima, as it is unknown if those were meant to represent the Scions of Dark or Light. Many of the models for these Espers do make their way into Final Fantasy XIV, as we've seen before with the Ivalice Raids and the Save the Queen storyline. The opposing Scions of Light to each Esper were only mentioned within the Esper's description. The names of the Scions of Light in Final Fantasy XII were then used to name the seats of each Convocation of the 14 in Final Fantasy XIV. In addition, the glyphs that were used for the Espers were an inspiration for the glyphs that the Ascians used to signify each seat. We see on screen the relations between the Espers in Final Fantasy XII and the seats of the Convocation of the 14. In Final Fantasy XII, the 13th Esper known as Zodiark was banished not because of the relation to the other Scions of Dark, but rather because the gods feared its potential power. In Final Fantasy XIV, the name Zodiark appears again as a powerful primal used by the Convocation of the 14th to try and save their world from the final days. Both Zodiarks are powerful beings that have the potential to cause massive destruction. And finally, we have a parallel between 2 characters of the same name, Venat. Both of these characters at one point in their respective stories sought rebellion against their own kind. In Final Fantasy XII, Venat used any means necessary to seek out their goal to free humanity from the Ikuria. However, many of Venat's methods were a means to an end. In Final Fantasy XIV, seeing the suffering her people had gone through during the final days, she had sought to defy the Convocation's decision to sacrifice more lives and sunder the world in order to stop Zodiark. It is undeniable how much of the world of Ivalice influenced the world of Final Fantasy XIV. and there is no doubt that we'll be seeing more of these influences not just in Final Fantasy XIV, but in future Final Fantasy titles as well. But Final Fantasy XII was the start of a brand new era for the series, one with new changes and innovations even more so than ever before. Thank you guys for watching. If you like the content, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. It will always be appreciated. And in the next video, we'll be looking at both the worlds of Final Fantasy XIII and Final Fantasy XV.